Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't beat that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 20 years of law enforcement analysis experience with additional 20 years of law enforcement experience as a captain with Troy PD in New York. He recently retired as the Director of State Operations, New York State's Crime Analysis Center Network. He holds a Master's of Public Administration from Marist University. Please welcome John Riegert. John, how are we doing?
We're doing great, Jason. Thanks for the invite.
Well, I am glad that I was able to get you before you travel in the world with all that free time you have in retirement these days.
We're looking forward to it.
All right. So I am looking forward to your perspective. That New York program is quite impressive. But before we get too far ahead of us, how did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
So as you mentioned, I did 20 years with Troy PD, but I retired, almost 17 or 18 years ago.
Yeah.
But while I was there, and I was lucky to have a varied experience at Troy PD. I did a bunch of years as an investigator, commander, but kind of touched pretty much all the services that you could get your hand in. I transitioned from unit to unit during my career, with the PD being big enough to have a varied number of services and units, but not too big where you got stuck in one of them. So in any event, as I was there, and probably in the last 6 or 7 years before I retired in 08, so probably like late 90s, early 2000s, through a program with DCGS, actually a program called Impact, which was to elevate crime analysis and agency partnerships, the PD hired a crime analyst. And I actually watched a series of analysts over a few years come into the agency and really learn and watch the challenges that they were going through to try to establish what crime analysis is and to identify what they can do to deliver to the agency as a product. And oftentimes, matter of fact, probably almost every one of the times when we hired somebody, you would see somebody come in who was relatively young in the professional world, maybe freshly out of college or a short period of time with some analysis experience before landing in the PD. But they just didn't have like a solid direction or foundation. And frankly, back then in the PD, crime analysis wasn't an elevated or highly reverenced service as I think it is for certainly a lot more agencies today than it was back then. So they were doing an awful lot of work, or trying to do an awful lot of work in a very challenging environment. So I would sit back and I find myself to be one that was trying to either coach or even facilitate elevating their work. But you would watch the challenges they would have with trying to find good data or trying to gain some level of legitimacy with those who are actors within the specific work they're doing, whether it's traffic safety or a crime pattern analysis. And you would just watch them face roadblock after roadblock. So my exposure to that process really helped me to kind of think about things when I eventually landed in this role more than 15 years ago.
So in the beginning, who was the audience for the analysts? Who were they servicing?
And I think that's where the guiding light is. And I think, depending on back then, these were individual agency analysts that were assigned to larger agencies that were dealing with a significant amount of criminal activity. So the state identified the top 17 crime counties in upstate New York, outside of New York City. And that's where this funding will go to those counties. So they were working in the major seat agencies of most of those counties, and they would go to the PD. In some PDs, these agencies were, more high speed when it came to crime analysis. They were already leveraging crime patterns. They were already having weekly meetings and looking at the changing activity and drilling down into information or looking at hot spots or hot people. But in our agency, although we were doing some of it, we certainly weren't doing it at that time in a very methodical and regular reference method. So they'd be walking in trying to build that, and they may have a agency or two, a champion or two within the agency to move the process along, but who their audience was really depended on who was guiding them. So in one instance where they're assigned to one commander or chief, they could be doing a lot for the detective bureau or trying to. In another process, it could be that they're trying to service the patrol agents, the patrol units on the streets, or maybe it's a traffic safety process. So you would see how they would try to find an avenue to gain some legitimacy and some work. And then you would often see them get that step and start working on some promising crime analysis solution, top offenders or high accident traffic accident locations. And then you would see the challenges of them having to deal with a challenging data set when they're unable to, because at that time, the PD's RMS system wasn't one that was easily extractable. So they were challenged and working, sometimes even going back and looking at, hard copy reports to try to do analysis. So you would watch those struggles and see how that happened. And you would understand where you can make that process better.
Yeah, I would think with the data, I mean, you potentially, I don't know how many counties there are in New York, but different county, different RMS potentially, and different looking data. So again, the struggles you talked about, the analysts were fairly new to the profession, new to working, and then they're coming into a situation where the main obstacle is just getting the right data in front of them.
Correct. So you're talking about now within the Crime Analysis Center network. So that experiences I had with analysts individually at the PD, at Troy PD, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, bring us now into the CAC program, where DCGS just did a tremendous job of introducing the Crime Analysis Network to initially only 4 counties. So to your point, there are 57 counties in upstate New York. And that project impact, when you looked at those counties, you realize that 4 of those counties, which were Erie, which is Buffalo, Monroe, which is Rochester, Onondaga, which is Syracuse, and then Albany County, which is Albany, obviously. Those 4 counties alone, at the time, were making up 25% of all the Part 1 crime reported in New York State outside of New York City. Mm-hmm. So with the program moved on back then was to establish an elevation to the crime analysis services they are already providing to these local agencies. Hey, what else can we do besides just giving an analyst? How about if we get these analysts situated in a spot where they can get some resources and some additional softwares and maybe some more staffing support where we can lend it and really make it a hub of crime analysis, not just for that individual police department, but can also support the county probation department, the DA's office, support the state police or partner with the state police. And so as the DCGS moved on establishing the 4 CACs in those 4 counties, that really kind of elevated resources, capabilities, trainings for the analysts who were assigned to those CACs now, no longer stuck in a PD, but now at a CAC supported by DCGS in a more global fashion. And then DCGS moved on working on how to federate search local RMS data from your point, as you were discussing the more than 500 police agencies in New York State that they are now connected to.
Right. When you are establishing this network and when you're building up the program, what model were you using, or was there another state that you were looking at for guidance as you were building up this network?
So I should preface that this program got to where they are today as a result of some great leadership that happened along the way. Initially, Denise O'Donnell and John Bilich were the commissioner and deputy executive of DCGS back in 08 and 09 when he established the program. We had Mike Green and Mike Wood in the early and mid 2000s to move us into, or the mid to late 2000s to move this process forward. And today with Commissioner Rosado and the deputy executive Joe Popcun, they have all kind of supported the process, but they have watched this elevate or evolve as it went along. And I don't want to speak, I'll speak kind of generically because I'm no longer with the program, but we'll share that. In 2010, when they first established, when I was there, and established the Albany Center, it really was in Albany County. It was strictly focused really on Albany PD, which represented probably more than half the crime in the county at the time. So that's certainly the focus of where you could do most of your work, primarily top offenders, crime patterns, things along those lines. But as you continue to do that work, I was assigned there, and you can picture this for a second, but we're in Albany, the city of Albany, which is the largest agency in the area, and we're there in their agency. We're actually embedded in their agency. DCGS supports the build out, but we're housed within the local major agency in each one of these center regional areas. And then you're there, and I'm starting to realize from my experience as an investigator for 10 years, and things are transient and more transient every day. And we would recognize that, hey, this burglary pattern matches a couple that are matching in this local jurisdiction out here in this agency or that agency within Albany County, and also across the bridge in my old neck of the woods in Rensselaer County in the city of Troy. So the more we were able to connect and get more of a view of local data on a federated search, which was a big investment on DCGS's part, the more we were able to connect shared offenders and shared offenses. And so the more you did that, the more legitimacy that you've kind of brought to the table for crime analysis to a lot of people. And I think if there was a small audience that really reverenced crime analysis when we were starting, and I say we, when I was there in 2010, starting the Albany Center, I think what you start to see is the more success is just built. I'm sure you've had this story 1,000 times before on a podcast. The more success is just build a legitimacy and build a legitimacy. And no longer are you just calling out trying to help somebody, but they're calling you with the information to get the help because they've seen that you have information, software, trained and capable analysts to support the program.
Yeah. You start with one champion and then you can build champions from there.
It is the key to success.
So I'm putting myself in the analyst shoes because when I started, I worked for the Washington Baltimore HIDA, and I was stationed at Baltimore Police Department. And similar to the analyst you just described, I was freshly out of grad school. I wasn't from Baltimore, so I just moved there, and I was stationed at Baltimore Police Department as an analyst. And so not only did I have to get acclimated to the data as an analyst, I had to get acclimated to the police culture inside the police department, and I had to get acclimated to just how the city behaves, right? The different aspects of the city, where location, what's hot, what's not, just the different, everything was brand new to me. So it was really an uphill battle for me to get acclimated because everything was so new.
And 100%. And I'm a big believer in round peg, round hole. You find your right people to fit things, and there's many things that can happen within it. Now, in the program I just left in those centers, there's a lot of different ways you can deploy a staff resource. So it's not necessarily somebody has to be tremendous with mapping solutions or cell analysis. With the advent of real-time work that the centers, many of the centers are doing, that type of work is completely different. So you want to find whatever your quality candidate is, that solution service that they can provide. But so you're 100% right in regards to, I think I really learned a lot. I think I grew as a supervisor, probably the most, even after leaving the PD and doing the supervisor. I think I was a supervisor for about 13 years between a sergeant and a commander there. But I probably grew the most as a crime analyst supervisor in my roles with the Crime Analysis Center, because you no longer had to be so rigid in a law enforcement process where everything has to happen a certain way and you got to respond a certain way and act in a certain way. And what I come to recognize with crime analysis, and I think one of my favorite things that I think I look back now on in regards to how we as a team of supervisors running the center addressed our staff, was allowing them to grow. So we would make our folks within the first couple of months get in front of, as long as the PD and Albany PD was a great PD and doing weekly meetings and truly referenced the crime analysis work from day one. So the folks that were doing the work knew that people were absorbing it, responding to it. Hey, we identified these 5 houses that are significant activity. Here's the top offender list. These guys are, whatever the case may be, they were leveraging that information very well. So as an analyst, already you're feeling that you're invested. But then you get the folks who are, listen, I could be in an APD meeting when I first walked over there, even though I was a commander in Troy PD. I'm sitting in the back seat over there. It's not my agency. So if you're 23 years old, freshly graduated from school, and you're sitting in a group of commanders and chiefs that are discussing what's happening in their city, you're not apt to be saying anything. But the more we pushed our folks to, hey, you're going to do a 5-minute presentation on this work that you just did, and you're going to go to these meetings, the more I recognized, and other team members recognized, or even included me to recognize, that you get your folks involved in that process sooner the better, for a whole mess of reasons, including if they make mistakes, because there's nothing about that teaches you better than obviously from a mistake. So having the capability of getting your folks in front of a group, and having public speaking is one thing. Public speaking in front of a group of law enforcement executives is probably even a little bit more of a challenge for many folks. So I think doing all that really kind of helped that. To your point about, because we hired some folks and especially in our early days, and still up until I left as the director of the center, you'd hire folks that are not even from the area. And we've had some analysts who were not familiar with the capital region area of Albany, Schenectady, and Troy, where we did most of our work. But a year in, because they were dedicated and really solid at their craft, understood who the top offenders were, and the top issues were, and the top crimes were, and the frequent MOs, or the folks who, as much as you hope that folks who are being released from supervision or released from incarceration back to supervision are going to return to a fruitful life absent of crime. You recognize that some also return to that. But recognizing when somebody's released and this is the MO of their crime, and all of a sudden that MO appears, that they began to understand and recognize that because they were sitting at their plethora of information and identifying that pattern is connected to somebody who was recently released. And sure enough, that car was seen at the scene. So it's not necessarily having to be there for 25 years to recognize what's going on. It's really just looking at the elements of crime analysis and doing your SARA work to identify what's right. And you could, some of our best analysts were folks who were not familiar with the area, but got familiar with what they were supposed to be doing with their discipline, whether it was robbery or burglaries or whatever the case may be.
You talked about presenting in front of officers. Talk a little bit about some of the things that happen, maybe teachable moments, things that were, okay, yeah, they taught you this way in college, but in the police department, when you present, we do it this way. Just kind of go into some of those things that you experienced and some of the differences.
No, yeah, it's a great question. I think what I've seen an awful lot is teaching your analysts, and myself included, that your audience only has a certain window of time to absorb what you want to give them, and they need the relevant points. And what you may know, hopefully, is real time and accurate, but things move quickly in every profession, but including law enforcement. So what you've put together, move it as though it's got reverence and it's accurate, but it's only accurate to what you've been afforded as far as information. So when you're presenting it in a method that is, here's what we have found, and we're providing this to you. The second thing is to be concise, both in presentation form, but also in document form. So we'll see some folks who will get into a deep dive into whatever the issue may be. We'll say a burglary pattern, and you could roll out a list of a large number of vehicles that were in the area, or a large number of potential known offenders that could be associated, but that's not going to be run down by an agency. You're going to bring it down to what you think is the most relevant information, and then as new information comes, you update it. But the fact that you're bringing in concise, brief, and most accurate information into the hands of your consumer is going to be consumed. And if you give them a 5 or 6 page document when they're working 20 or 30 other cases besides the burglary pattern that you're working, that's not going to be consumed. So the more concise and directed you are with what you're presenting, both in a public speaking forum or in a PowerPoint presentation, whatever the case may be, as well as whatever product you may be disseminating either to an individual investigator, or perhaps it's a generic posting that's going out to an agency or multiple agencies, whatever the case may be. The ability to be concise and direct is extremely important.
Yeah. I'm curious to get your feelings on from your vantage point during this time. It's 2010. You're from Troy, so you're a little bit of an outsider. You're former sworn, so there's always that, right, to go into any police department. But I was curious what you felt like as you were going through this. Did you feel like a fish out of water in multiple aspects as you're trying to learn and grow and lead?
No, 100%. So I'll give you a couple of insights on that. Albany, Schenectady, Troy I would say is a pretty, capital region is pretty much the generic area that is shared amongst, whether it's criminal activity or it's just the regular, the community life is kind of the capital region area. So I'm well known in Albany PD and Schenectady PD, whatever the case may be, when I was in Troy, and actually worked a significant homicide case that had a lot to do with crime analysis that was connected to Albany PD, and spent an awful lot of time in their shop within the year before I actually landed in this position, a couple of years before. But you are not an Albany PD member. So I was very conscious of that process and sat back. And I think our ability to be hey, we're here to help kind of positioning and provide whatever we had to present and make my role when we ran the shop. We had a a detective sergeant who was exceptional in crime analysis and in intelligence development. We worked together as a team. So we had an Albany PD detective sergeant and myself. And so I would sit back and be the resource to develop what we needed to develop and bring to them, but I didn't act as an authority. And I think that helped because as we became more legitimate and more successful, it was a lot easier. I think as time went on, the reverence for the position and the reverence for the center elevated to what we were delivering. And I think by being hey, we're here to help kind of a resource, it was a good approach. The second thing I'll offer to you now, back in 2010, when I took this position, I retired from Troy as a commander. I was on the track to probably elevate at some point down the road in the agency, but I was ready to try something new. And when I took this position, whether it was my Troy PD counterparts or anybody else in law enforcement, the response was, what's a crime analysis center? What is this work? And and so there was a lot of trying to explain, at least back then, what we thought we were. Frankly, what we thought back then and to what we are today is completely different. But what I would say is 2010, if you take every one of those folks who was asking me, what is this work, to ask them today about the reverence for this network that the DCGS has put together, they would all be, I think one of the nicest things about the role when I left it was I think the vast majority of law enforcement agencies in the state have a high regard for what the center does. Each one of the centers in the state are a little different to some degree, and they all deliver resources, again, for their own region. So they may have a few different kind of services, but regardless of what they may be and how they're delivered, the reputation of those centers and the staff within them is very, very high and very well known. So you've watched that, or I've watched that as I sat back, that change from 2010 to 2025 for the reverence or crime analysis. And then take a step back away from the CAC program and DCGS in the state, and just look like the success of your podcast is an example of how crime analysis has been elevated within law enforcement altogether, where it's a commodity now. It's no longer a luxury, but a needed resource no matter what you're moving on when it comes to an agency's work in reducing crime and identifying the best way to move forward.
So I guess in the beginning, 2010, you got your data. We talked about the data. We talked about the personnel. We talked about the jurisdiction that you're covering. As you're establishing what you were talking about with the center, in the beginning, was there something like, oh, we are going to handle maybe this crime, but not this, or we're gonna have to limit given resources, we're going to limit our scope? I guess what was the scope? Because as you alluded to, it's really expanded it in 2025. But in the beginning, I'm wondering what the scope was back then.
So piggybacking off of the impact program, our scope was really part one crime activity. So really we had analysts that were assigned to burglaries and robberies and larcenies, assaults and homicides. And our focus was primarily that activity, especially back in the early to mid teens of 2010 to 2015, 16, 17, when burglary was a very high number. That took an awful lot of our work. Larceny activity, known offenders. So we're really structured on that. And again, remember, New York State is blessed with one of the top fusion centers in the country, with the New York State Intelligence Center run by the state police. So we're not a counterterrorism process. We have a great partner that coordinates all that work and many other services that NYSEC does. So the focus really was back then was strictly on just those crimes that are occurring in those urban communities primarily, that are either transient or shared by an offender, or they're a shared event that's being conducted by the same individual or individuals. And so the focus really started with that, and to reduce those numbers. So that's how the program was, again, based off that project impact, and kind of moved that forward. As the program, I don't want to get too far ahead, but impact would turn into what is a program now that New York State has, which is called GIVE, Gun Involved Violence Elimination, which is the same focus, but now strictly on gun violence. And as that has developed over the years, again, with the guidance of DCGS, the centers have taken more of a proactive role with that work as well.
Okay. So do you have any favorite stories for around this time? You talked about the one homicide that you worked on, but I mean, as you're getting buy-in, and is there a particular case or story that you like to tell?
Well, in regards to the homicide, I guess I'll tell this quick story. So in 2003, an Albany PD confidential informant testified in a grand jury proceeding, and 2 days later was unfortunately shot and killed in the city of Troy. So it was a confidential informant testified in grand jury. And to make a long story short, there were three actors in the case. Those three actors, one was the shooter, one was the target of the grand jury, and one was the facilitator to get the shooter and the target who was looking to address the confidential informant. His name was Chris Dravick, really nice kid from a nice to facilitate the process. So they had three defendants. We got on to this lead relatively early, and as we got into it, we got into a lot of phone analysis. And at the time when I was in the investigative bureau, if there was anybody who could handle an Excel sheet, there probably wasn't anybody, but it landed on my desk and I tried. And again, back then in 2010, you're not getting anything besides cold detail records with the triangulation information for the towers. Oh. Over about, I always estimate how much, but I'm going to say probably 30 hours of work, 40 hours of work, and borrowing the DOT map, a Department of Transportation map that I got from my next door neighbor who worked at the DOT at the time. We mapped out a path of the actors connecting with each other the morning of the homicide using cell phone triangulation to the crime homicide scene, back to Albany where they disposed of the firearm, and then down to Brooklyn where they all went their separate different ways. And all that information was eventually used to help apprehend them as well as to bring it to court. Where if we had that same case today, that's about 45 minutes of work and name your software package. So I that was my introduction to realize, and by the way, back then it was LexisNexis and open source information, which was also very relevant in those cases because we're dealing with folks from a couple of different states. So you really get to reverence that kind of, I got to get a reverence for what crime analysis can deliver when it's delivered appropriately. So now you asked for what cases kind of elevate the program, and there's a whole mess of them, but I would focus on two. We had probably within the first year and a half, 2 years of being in operation at the center. And again, we're expanding the role beyond Albany County. So we're partnering with agencies in a couple of the adjoining counties. And we started learning of two commercial burglaries that occurred in rural areas of the county. And it was a cinder block through the front window of a convenience store. And the place was cleaned out of cigarettes. And it was a cinder block. They looked the same. The glass entry was the same. Removal was the same, et cetera, et cetera. And then over a course of a couple of weeks, we actually learned of two more that happened in adjoining counties just by chance because we put out a bulletin that said, hey, we have these two. And we would never put a bulletin out with just two events, but because they were so obviously related, we did. And we got two more, put out another bulletin. And within about 3 days, we got 17 reports from like 7 different counties because it just made its way through a chain of communications back to us that were all the same MO. One agency had a partial plate. One agency had it where the vehicle dinged the gas pump when it was leaving the scene, so it hit the gas pump. It had damage to the vehicle. Another agency had a rough image of one of the actors from a surveillance camera. And so it was all these different little events. And make a long story short, through some work with tracking down insurance databases so that you can, Clarco and other insurance databases where you can track accident reports, we find a vehicle that was reported with damage. We had the vehicle type 2, and I forget what it was right now, but I'll say it was a Monte Carlo that had damage reported. That was a partial plate because you did a lawman search to pull out the data of all the potential matches for a vehicle. We do look for the registered owner. We does not match the vehicle, but we then look at the residence, pull up some folks, and matches the image on the process.
Wow.
So as a result of just having all that different information from different parts, again, it's all those little tiny pieces. And I'll say from the center's perspective, one of the things I really elevated, because when I worked in Troy PD, I also worked part-time for North Greenbush PD, which is a very suburban, rural, suburban town agency. So it was, you either write traffic tickets or you shake hands. It was a great alternative to working in city urban community policing work, and it was great. But you learn that there's a lot of relevant information that they have as well. And so the traffic stop or the partial plate or the LPR read that comes from those small agencies are actually very relevant for the large ones. So when people say, hey, we got to connect to this big agency and this big agency, don't forget those small ones because they have a lot of relevant information that fits those pieces of the puzzle. So we watched those pieces of the puzzle come together for that case. And it's because we had these small agencies that were also dealing with the same activity that the larger ones were. And the funny part of the story is I think we had like 17 eventual events that we put into a giant pattern and put it back out. I would do presentations 2 years later in like Southern New York or wherever the case may be for the program. And I'd get it. It happened like at least 2 times, maybe 3 times, where somebody raised their hand and said, hey, I had that pattern down here. Same player, same car, boom, boom, boom. And they didn't even realize it because at the time it was outside of our region. They didn't realize of our information. So that's kind of how I think the global, not just an Albany PD or a Rochester PD, helped elevate the program. It was really about elevating the reverence and the importance of all those smaller agencies. And then you asked about a success that kind of let me know you felt really comfortable being on the map. And I'll transition to an unfortunate event that happened at the largest mall up here in upstate New York, called Crossgates, where I think it was 2015. I could be wrong on the year, but we just started working real-time services. So we put folks who are truly dedicated to listen to radios, looking at CAD, and if they can help, they were helping, but they were sitting in the background. They weren't very forward-facing. It was really us just getting our feet wet in the process. And on a Saturday afternoon, I'll preface this by saying two of the analysts that had worked in the shop were working over the course of the last couple of weeks on a bunch of gun violence that was going back and forth in the city of Albany and Troy and a couple other places. And 2:00 in the afternoon, one of those analysts is walking in the mall, and she recognizes one of the major actors that she's been following on social media and criminal activity, walks by her, and she just texts the other analyst to say, "Ha ha, guess who I just saw." And 25 minutes after that text, she is running out of the mall because there's exchange of gunfire outside the Apple store. And she picks up the phone as she's running out, literally, and calls the center and says, "Hey, I don't know if he's involved, but this person that we're looking at was in the mall 20 minutes before the shots rang out, FYI." At the time, we didn't have access to the county probation GPS activity for those folks who were assigned to GPS. But we reached out to probation. They actually called back. They verified that that individual was wearing a GPS bracelet and he was in the mall. Secondarily, within like 30 minutes of the shooting taking place, one of our champion folks in an agency got a still from the images captured in the mall surveillance camera and forwarded the image back to the center. We go to that individual's social media page, and he was kind enough to be live streaming an hour previous to this event, wearing the same clothes that he was caught on in the act of the shots fired. Subsequent to that, there was about 6 actors in that process. Those 6 actors were all identified by the staff of the CAC using social media, whatever the case may be. And we had 3 of our folks testify in that trial. That case, which, as you can imagine, when you have a shots fired at the mall, brings in every agency to respond to it. And it was highly notable within the local law enforcement community, as well as the federal agencies that were responding as well, that within 40 minutes, the center had the folks identified, or the individual identified, the first one anyways. And so that really kind of elevated us from hey, crime analysis is kind of a cute thing, and it's been very helpful. Thanks for the stuff on the known offenders and the patterns. This is really great to this is a solid resource. Our staff had developed to a large number with some experience as well as numbers. So that really was, I always say, the advent for that center, the Albany Center's elevation to being really a prominent part of most agency response to an event when it occurs.
Nice. Yeah, that is exciting stuff when all of that flows and falls together, knowing all the different systems and how that comes together.
And I'll end this point by saying this, and I probably told the story 30 times, and the analyst who recognized the individual, her name is Kaitlyn Gibbons, and I think she's still with our program now. She left for a period of time, and I think she's back. But she's a terrific analyst. But I tell everybody all the time, when you want to know the reverence and the capabilities of analysts. Now, I'm going to guess how Kaitlyn was young, 23, 24 years old at the time. She's never done a traffic stop. She never done an interview in a back room to interview anybody. Never met this gentleman on the street. Never had an interaction with him before. But here she is walking in the mall and recognized him because of the amount of time that she spends on working on whatever the cases were during the course of the time. And that, to me, is I think a real tremendous signal to demonstrate how powerful and capable analysts can be from just sitting at a computer screen and really leveraging all the resources they have. If I'm in the mall and I see somebody from the days when I was on the street or the days I was doing investigations work, I'm the worst. I'd be like, "Hey, I played a lot of baseball when I was younger. Did I play that guy with baseball, or was that somebody I had in a traffic stop?" And I would not have that capability to put those two pieces together. Some people do and some people don't. And if you have the right analyst, round peg into the round hole, that's what you can elevate your staff to do. And that's, in that case, it demonstrated it very, very well.
Yeah, I did worry about that when I was an analyst, recognizing somebody on the street that I was doing a workup on, because I felt that I would probably have the worst poker face in the world. Not be able to keep it together.
As me, my friend, as me.
Hi, I'm Kyle Stoker, and I'm encouraging you to vote in the IACA elections. So make sure you go to the IACA website and vote, because our membership has a voice in who leads the organization, and you want to make sure that your voice is heard. Thank you very much.
Hello, this is Joshua Todd, U.S. Border Patrol, Buffalo Sector Intelligence at Wellesley Island Station. And I'd like you to remember that numbers on the page are reflective of the humans that we serve. We've had a recent report of an overdose in the county, and we discussed it at a local meeting. And then later that day, I went to the barber and got a haircut, and the woman was visibly distraught. And we got to chatting, and it was actually her son that overdosed and passed away that last week. So while we do a lot of reports, and they are numbers on the spreadsheet, they end up reflecting the humans that we do serve.
All right, the analysts are getting established. You're getting the data straightened out. You're getting the buy-in. You're getting the communication. I want to talk a little bit about developing the analysts in terms of accreditation and the importance of creating promotion potential for the analyst.
Yeah, so when we first started, one of the things I think we were terrific at was training. DCJS was just terrific in providing the resources and the personnel to support training to our staff. So if you found a training or a service that was relevant to the work that we were doing in any individual center or across the network, DCJS would support getting that training for our people. So initially, one of the high selling points of becoming a member of our program was you're going to get trained very, very well, and the experience is terrific. We've had some great folks that have served as training directors along the way that were really able to elevate that process. But then when you train folks who are really, really well, and crime analysis is growing at a significant pace, they're going to have lots of opportunities. And so, initially, all of our analysts are funded under contracts, partner agencies, either with a local university or with here in the Albany region. We're lucky enough to be partnered with the John F. Institute of Public Safety. And so our folks were contractors and compensated well, but maybe not as well as a state or federal employee. So you would lose folks all the time, capable folks, to all these other opportunities that are continuing to develop and grow. Mark Keller, who's the current Deputy Commissioner of OCAS, which is the office that oversees crime analysis centers, and a collective team kind of built a couple of processes along the way. We developed a level 1 proficiency for analysts. That's a level 1 crime analyst certification. And that's strictly something that's required of all of our analysts within a year of being hired in the center, analysts that are hired by DCJS or through the contract. And that's pretty much 100 questions, and making sure that you have a solid foundation of the remedial portions and the foundations of crime analysis. What's the Sarah model? Do you recognize mapping solutions? Can you move on certain things? Recognizing really the basic tenets of crime analysis. And we have a proficiency that you have to pass on that. And I would say that the vast majority of folks who work sometime within the center, that experience usually elevates it enough so they can pass that exam. And that was great. And so we started with the basis of that process. But then we looked at a level 2 certification. And so with that, we started looking at what we can do to tie in a financial benefit to gaining a secondary elevation of processes. And level 2 was really a portfolio-driven process. We had that, I think, 3 years of service, and there was a large checklist of items that you had to complete a certain number of the menu so that you can make an application, and you put that whole application together and it gets in front of the committee. And if you were to attain your level, there was a little financial gain to that process for the analyst. So we built that process. So those 2 things were great. But as you continue to grow, you also need supervisors. And, one of the things I think is tremendous about our program is we've really elevated crime analysts into, it's not just a cop's world. We have now supervising analysts. We have assistant director analysts. So our supervising analysts are called lead analysts, and an assistant director analyst in the shop. And truly, some of our shops are, I want to say the Albany shop the last I knew was close to 40. So you're supervising a large group, depending on the size. It's one of the largest ones. Those analysts went from not having any window for advancement to having level 1, now level 2. Hey, now there was one analyst supervisor. Now you have shops with 3 or 4 or 5 supervisors because you're working 16 or 18-hour shifts. You have supervisors for real-time, supervisors for traditional crime analysis work. So that continues to elevate and prevent more things. And that's been terrific. And the last thing that I know that Commissioner Heller and team are working on is transitioning all those staff into civil service positions. And so as we've elevated from, I think I started with 6 or 7 people in the Albany Center, and the other centers had maybe the same amount or a few more, so maybe 30 people in the program in the first couple of years, till I know that I think we're north of 250 for the program now. And that's not just folks within DCGS, but our partner agency folks as well, but more than 100 analysts. Mm-hmm. They're moving over to civil service to further embolden the permanency of the program as well as the positions, and all of that I think is a terrific step for the program and for our team. You have some folks now that have been around 12, 13 years, 14 years with the program that have truly are experts in their field, depending on what they're working on, and you want to make sure you hold on to them.
Yeah, and the civil service aspect of it, I'm curious the benefits to that, because I don't know if that's well understood.
Well, I'll speak generically, not speaking for the program, but if I'm a crime analyst, and it's interesting when I just retired and I was blessed to have a pension when I worked for the police department. So I understand the value of what you look for retirement, but I'm not sure when I was 22 and got on the job that I was really worried about what my retirement was going to look like. And I think that from today's day is no different for any 22, 23-year-olds looking for a position. But getting into civil service provides a track where there's a retirement process, there's strong health benefits, there is labor protections and things along that line that truly embolden the process for an employee. And on the other side, it provides more structure for the employer. So you have more direct role of supervision and span of control and all the things you want to have in running a shop. Civil service really does kind of provide a formal framework for that process. So as a supervisor, it's great. As a supervisor, it does present some more work to make sure that you're meeting all the requirements that you have to have within a civil service labor party agreement. And on the other side of it, from an employee standpoint, it provides a lot of, I don't want to say protection is the right word, but it provides a stronger framework for the position that you're in. You're not worried about a grant being renewed every couple of years, those kind of processes.
All right. Well, let's continue down the path. Let's talk about the latter part of your 15 years. We've talked a lot about in the beginning. I want to move on to towards the end, maybe the last 5 years or so, getting into some of the things that the analysts were working on and just how it changed from beginning to end.
So I've stepped into the operations role for the state within the last few years of the program when I was there, and you learn a lot. You think you know a lot when you're working within your center, and you think you got a good scope of what's happening across the state, but then you're not. You really get into the weeds of looking at the other centers and what they're doing. You realize that there's varying work across the country, I'm sure, in crime analysis, but even across New York State. And depending on who your consumers are and what is desired by them, your deliverables could be a little bit different. And capabilities, depending on the shop and what they're working on, could be a little bit different. Some shops are very, very strong in the real-time work, but some shops are very, very strong in supporting different scenarios. We have folks who do OD work. We have a lot of relationships with the ATF and working on NIBE correlation processes and things along those lines. All those different services may be a little bit different in each place. But what I'll say is when I've stepped to a more global look, you realize how much, from our perspective anyways, how much more there is of shared offender offenses that happen across the state that are not picked up on because they're very much often seen as a local issue. So one of the big advantages I think the Crime Analysis Center has, and now in partnership with the NYSEC and the Fusion Center, is really looking at, hey, the Albany region has had this activity, whether it's organized retail theft, which could be, everybody's dealing with, whether it's Ulta Beauty, retail, whatever the case may be, there's a lot of organized retail theft with large, high impact volume theft, $50,000, $100,000 hits. And you can see that happen within your region. And an individual agency may have that view of, well, they hit us and they left. And whether it's a local person or somebody from somewhere else, they went back to where they came. And then we started seeing and pick up on patterns of, well, they hit in Albany today and then they went out to Syracuse. And we're now communicating between agencies and centers to say, hey, the activity that happened here. And also, by the way, we're in inclusion with the the Fusion Center, hey, by the way, they learned of an event that happened across the border in Pennsylvania. So the amount of activity that we are seeing that is transient across the state that can be examined and have some further analysis that could potentially link offenders and or offenses was a lot greater than I think I originally realized. And now you see a lot of elder fraud that is certainly being elevated in that kind of same process, whether it's local financial institution, local retail financial institutions, whether a bank or a credit union, where you see fraudulent activity that is targeting the elderly, and you realize that same exact MO and likely the same actor is happening, not just in your local region, but somewhere else within the state within the last few days, that helps you realize that it's the same actor or actors, and you can start connecting the dots.
And I can only imagine the amount of data. I'm always amazed in talking with analysts, just all the different databases that they have access to, all the different stuff that comes across their desk and computers. So in this time as the network's growing, as some things are coming easier, you're also getting access to more and more data. And heck, an analyst can spend their entire time on social media if they wanted to, right? And it was fruitful. So I guess talk about, again, towards the end here, of just the amount of data and as a leader handling all this different data that analysts have access to.
I think it's really two sides of the coin. I think one of the things that had made the CAC program was the access to the local agency data. And it's not just you're able to do queries within the records management systems. And that's been terrific. But as technology has advanced in 2010 compared to 2025, what we could not do in 2010, and this is whether you're a crime analyst or somebody working in a retail store, the ability of what you can do now because of IT and capabilities is 10 times greater. What we can do on our phones is just, it goes without saying what the dramatic changes are. So yes, we're inundated with a lot more data, but there's also a lot more solutions that help streamline the search within that data to really bring it down to what you're looking for. The real challenge, for analysis, is really having the ability to search things on a similar platform where you have one ability to kind of make queries that provides you consistent, real-time, and factual information, which when you have 500 agencies is not an easy solution. And then when you start looking at it from a more global perspective, that becomes more and more challenging. I think in some parts of the country, you see, I think this is true in California, I know it's true, speaking to some of our counterparts out that way, you could have very large areas of the state that are all working off a similar RMS system where you can have access to a large a data set that is very consistent, very real time, and all formatted in the same process. So working through those things now, as IT becomes that much more capable and IT solutions now become even more feasible, not just for the DCGS and the state, but for local agencies where they may not have been able to deploy a high-end RMS system 15 years ago. Those systems now are becoming a lot more competitive and capable. That solution for a local agency could be a lot more reasonable, so you can see it being deployed more and more. So I think there is a lot more data, but I also think on the other side of that coin is there's a lot more solutions that are coming as a result of what we can do today with data and integration. And I think one of the biggest concerns we have as we move forward as a society, let alone law enforcement and crime analysis, is just the struggle with privacy and data and how we collectively move with that. One of the things I would say about the CAC program as they have moved is they've been very, very conservative in what we accessed or what they accessed. And it's always been only public information or criminal records. We don't do any kind of, have any resources that do any, back-end searches in anybody's social media or whatever the case may be, without court orders or anything else that's provided by a police agency. We are strictly looking at open source information. But as time goes on, I think all this information that's available, the ability with surveillance cameras now bring to law enforcement, and how much you can do with that, tie that in with license plate readers, tie that in with the ability for police agencies to, when the evidence presents itself, to get the information on what a phone has been or what's been tracked on a phone, et cetera, et cetera. All that can tie into tremendous information and capabilities, but it also continues to elevate the concern that you're still maintaining a strong line between what you want to access and what is certainly beyond the the scope of law enforcement without a search warrant, et cetera.
Right. Before I get to your advice for our listeners, I do, and this I guess would be probably advice anyway, those that have gone through our leaders and go through the analyst hiring process and hire analysts, I like to get their perspective on their decision making. Like what are you looking for when you were hiring an analyst? What were some things that you were looking for? What were some things that were important, or maybe some stuff that wasn't important as you were going through picking from candidate A versus candidate B?
That's kind of evolved as I moved on in my career. I would say that it's still to me somewhat surprising the number of candidate submissions, whether it's a cover letter or a resume, that have inaccuracies in it. When you're looking for a crime, it's as simple and remedial as that step is. That is really a critical component for a review. If you post a position for crime analyst, you can get anywhere between, depending on the region, 75 to 100 applicants, because the initial entry point may be something that many people can apply for. So you're trying to weed out what you have, and you hope you have somebody with experience. There's nothing more valuable than an internship. We've had very little school professional experience. So if you have the opportunity, whether it's paid or not, you certainly want to do that. But the ability to make sure you're extremely, what you're presenting, your cover letter, your resume, are as clean as they can be, obviously. The second thing I would say is, as we grew, so if you asked me what I was looking for in 2010, when we're looking strictly for what I would describe as a traditional crime analyst, what kind of research capabilities have you had? What did you have with Excel and Access? Did you have any experience with SPSS? Even if that experience, depending on the circumstances, maybe did you take a course in it? We would also then ask for some samples of some work to get an idea of how somebody would work. And one of the things that we moved on in the Albany Center in coordination with Albany PD when we started, I don't know if I want to say like 2014 or 2015, I'll guess, but we actually, with the permission of Albany PD, put together a packet of a crime pattern that happened several years previous. And it was a residential burglary crime pattern that had like 15 events to it. And so we literally would scan the reports for those 15 burglary events. And there was, in the investigation, there was a pawn slip that matched up to one of the events. And another one, there was a suspicious occurrence that matched up to another event. And so we took probably like 35 events, maybe like 70 pages. And of those 35 events, 17 or 18 were relevant to the pattern. The other were just noise. But we put it all together, and if you went through that, you could be able to figure out who did it. And so we would work that process and submit it to our final candidates and say, hey, look, we know you don't have any access to any kind of, you can't do any mapping or ArcGIS or anything like that. But what would be the steps you would do to look through this? Please review the material. We give them like 4 or 5 days to respond back. And again, there's a little faith in this process. You're going to have them do it and sure they can get help. But then when they came for the secondary interview, you would ask them about what they did. And over the course of the career that at least I played with that process, we had a couple of folks who came in and hammered it. Here's your 15 events. Here's your 2 suspects. The reason why I identified it was this suspicious occurrence, this pawn slip. These events weren't related. But this Bolton, in regards to the larceny, is actually the same guy. It looks like the larceny was going to be a burglary, but it ended up being just a larceny because he got scared away. So you really get to see how somebody kind of feeds that process. So to finish, the answer to the question is, initially it would be about, in 2010 it was, can you extract, can you do pivot tables? What do you know about manipulating some data, presentation capabilities, those kind of processes, especially when you're hiring folks who are relatively fresh out of school. Mm-hmm. As we grew into a real-time component, those qualities are certainly very, very relevant to the process. But what do you know about social media? How do you look about this? What do you know about that? We have an analyst with our program right now who came to an interview in our shop at one point, and she literally, we had 4 panelists on the interview, and she goes, I'd like to meet all. I know all of you. You are John Riegert. You're this. You're that. You're that. John, you had a career in Troy PD. She had a laundry list for each one of the folks that she assumed was going to be on the panel. So wow. She did her homework. She did the understanding of who was going to be there and demonstrated a whole mess of steps with that process, right? She's obviously thorough. She was obviously competent. She was, and obviously had some capability to do some open source searching. So those kind of things has now become as relevant as the tool set. You want to have a well-rounded person who has that capability, and you want to have somebody who, when they sit down, as hard as it is when you're doing an interview, when you're fresh out of college and doing your man, I hope I get this job because I've been looking now for a while. But to be somebody who can be as confident as they can be when they're in front of a group like 3 or 4 folks who've been around for a little while in the profession, to demonstrate that you have the capability to do the communications afterwards. One of the things we haven't talked about, and I think is so important for crime analysts, is we always, and when I say we, I include myself in this process. You're working a pattern or an investigation, and you do a whole mess of work. Hey, we identified the vehicle. You do all you put all together a packet to demonstrate how you got that vehicle. You send it off to the investigator, and you're waiting to get some more information back, and you don't hear anything for a couple of days. And what you don't realize is that of course you do realize, but what you forget is that investigation continues to move. And although the investigator could probably use some more services and continue to connect, because you haven't knocked on the door, their first thought isn't going back to give you the update of what's going on. So instead of continuing to work from a crime analyst position on, I'm going to work now from now I don't know this car, maybe within hours of getting that information, they've already identified, okay, here's the actor in this case based on the information we provided. You got to maintain communications all the time, even when it's uncomfortable to make that phone call. And that includes me with a 20-year experience of being then in the crime analysis center. I used to have to force myself to make a phone call to an investigator. Hey, I know I'm bothering you. I'm really sorry I'm bothering you, but just checking on this. We gave you this information a couple of days ago. Is there anything new? Because as everybody knows, that's I'm sure listening to this, is any piece of information is relevant to get you to the next step. But if you don't ask for it, there's many times you're not going to get it, even though it's sitting there. So that ability to pick up the phone, or today, fortunately or unfortunately, to send a text message to get that next step is really, really critical to continue to move your capabilities further.
Yeah. And I think that is a big struggle for new analysts, new employees. What's that expectation? Obviously, if weeks go by, you're waiting too long before you're following up. But if the expectation is like within the hour or 2 hours, you kind of find that out as you go. But it is a little bit of a struggle in the beginning of like, okay, when should I follow up? How long should I wait? And there's no obviously finite answer to that. It's just something that you have to work through and understand the behavior of the office.
Yeah, and one of the factors to that is really the physical location of where the analyst is compared to the folks who are doing the work that are your consumer. When for a period of time in the Albany Center, we were right across the hall from the detective bureau. So we saw the folks at lunch, we saw them walking in and out, they had communications, our folks built great relationships with the folks just by mere being across the hallway. So that certainly elevated your capabilities, but when you're in many places, you're not sitting with the folks who are doing the work. So it's more of the phone call, it's more of that text, it's more of the follow-up. And to your point, what's the balancing act where you're not going to burn your bridge, but on the other hand, keep your work relevant and keep their work relevant if you can help them out as they're moving forward.
Yeah, that made me think of something. I'm curious to get your perspective with COVID, the work from home aspect of all of our lives come probably faster than what it would have naturally. So I'm curious to know from your point of view, an analyst being able to do the job remotely and not being necessarily on site.
Yeah, I've done a 360. I think I might have done a 420 on that discussion. I'm really not 100% sure how I fall. Just globally speaking, I would say that there's an awful lot of benefit to in-person operations when a group is involved. So from a center's perspective, in some of the centers that I've experienced with, there's a real-time component. You need to be there. You need to be working with your partners, and the communication is not just electronic, but it's literally person to person as things are happening. I think that a lot more gets facilitated as a result of being with your cohorts. That said, I think as a result of what technology allows us to do today, I think we have the ability to be a lot more of a supportive employer, that when circumstances present themselves, that you can make it for some crime analysis services, depending on what your workload is or what your task is for that day or in general. I think there's ability to let things happen when it works. So I'm not a big fan of doing that remotely, even if you're take my experiences out of it. But if you're a single analyst in an agency, or 2 folks in an agency, your ability to be together, to communicate, and to facilitate ideas and discussions and to bounce off of each other is so much more when you're in person. And I'll give a brief discussion in regards to when COVID had happened, and there was some civil unrest that were done in some of the urban communities. It was during the height of COVID considerations, and our analysts in many shops were not able to be physically in the PDs. I mean, literally as a result of restrictions that were put into place, you weren't able to go into the building. So we were operating remotely in the real-time setting. And that communications capability during the course of that period was amazing to see how well folks can adapt in that process, but you also realize how limited you are. I don't have my 3 screens to do this. The connection to any kind of video services is really not relevant because it's just so slow. All those kind of capabilities that present depending on the environment that you're in. So I would say that one of the things I learned as I grew in this last role is really the importance of getting people together to talk. And something I probably could have done better when I first landed in the Crime Analysis Center that I look to now and I think is so important. So the more you do that collectively together, hey, here's what's going on today, especially as your center gets larger and larger. Here's what's going on today. What's everybody working on? Hey, I can help you with that. That kind of team building process, you can't replicate that through a Teams discussion board. So I think I'm a person who would stand up for in-person whenever relevant, but I'm also a person who recognizes the importance of making sure you take care of your people when you can, so you adjust as needed.
Nice. All right, let's get to the advice section then. Just curious what your advice would be, either for someone maybe looking to get into the field, just starting out, or maybe even a veteran analyst. Talk about, and it can be a wide range from career to, I like the return on investment question, something to study now that might be important 5 years from now. But what advice do you have for us?
It's pretty basic, but I look at the folks who have landed in the center, especially those who have been hired relatively shortly after leaving college or just starting in. Mm-hmm. A good number of those are folks who have made some kind of connection. They networked some way, shape, or form. They reached out to folks who have an association to DCJS. They reached out to maybe somebody they know within the program. They've cold called or cold emailed or made cold inquiry just into like the generic agency to say, hey, I'm looking for an internship. What can I do? And it's all about timing. It's amazing how many times I've gotten inquiries from folks who are interested in internships, and I'd really like to bring them in, but I didn't have an opportunity to do so. And then other times when I would love to have a candidate and didn't, and somebody by chance would reach out, and we do some back and forth and qualifying steps to verify that they'd be a good candidate. Next thing, they're an intern. And those interns, is obviously as an employer, there's no better way to get an eye on the capabilities of a candidate. And that oftentimes, if you're a good candidate, you're going to find yourself with an opportunity either at the place that you're interning, or word of mouth spreads. Hey, you know what? I just want you guys, everybody works in the network, crime analyst folks as well. We have this great intern. He or she is looking for an opportunity, but we just don't have one here. But boy, we wish we did. And you have that conversation with somebody else and they become your champion. So I'm a big proponent of doing as much knocking on the door as possible. And I think there's no better way than trying to find an internship. And if that includes spending 12 to 16 hours of your own time somewhere just to have FaceTime with the folks in the business, there's nothing better. And the second thing I kind of pointed out before, but get comfortable with all forms of communicating. And that's writing a solid email, being objective and concise in text form, as well as public speaking. All those things are tremendous assets for an analyst. And the more that you have some experience standing in front of a group, that's going to be a tremendous asset for you as you move forward in your crime analysis field. And that becomes evident when you're involved in the interview process, by the way. And then you mentioned supervisors. I think it's great. One of the things I might have mentioned this already, but I really learned transitioning from the law enforcement side, the ability to let your team develop what they think is the right solution for an ask, take a traffic safety analysis, whatever the case may be. Instead of having the law enforcement executive, myself, or whatever the case may be, what do you guys think? And let them build the template of their solution so that they learn the process. And then I may come in afterwards and sit down and say, okay, where are we, guys? Let's see your first draft of where we're moving on. And they may have it 100%. In fact, compared to what I was thinking, maybe even at 125%. And they're going to do terrific. They had a great solution. It's going to be a great product. Or I may come in and say, you know what, this is great, but I think this may be either too detailed or maybe not to the point of what the consumer's looking for. Based on my experience, let's do this and this and this. But by letting your folks do that run, it may cost you an extra day of work. But if it's not a high priority ask that needs to be addressed in immediate fashion, especially like a crime and traffic safety study or whatever the case may be, it's not in regards to an active investigation, that ability to let your folks grow has a huge return.
Yeah.
So I find by doing that, that has really opened my eyes to, hey, this analyst thought about doing A, B, and C, elevated this data that we didn't even know we had, found this solution, looked out to another agency to see how they actually, this process or another entity, how they found a solution. That growth wouldn't have happened if I walked in and said, do this. And even if some of those steps may not have been 100% the step for the answer, it was still a development process for them. So as a supervisor, I think one of the things that I've learned to do when you're able to do it is to allow your folks to kind of move that process forward on their own so they can learn steps, and then you provide some feedback on that.
Yeah, and I think that also I talked about earlier about reading the office, reading the room, what to do and what not to do. And I think the analyst does have to develop beyond just what they're asked. They have to understand over time, when is it a good return on investment to take the extra time to maybe look down into a rabbit hole and when it's not. And again, there's no finite answer to that, but taking the opportunity to doing more than what you're asked is also a skill that you develop over time.
Correct. And the more exposure that you have, and this is really a reference point for my law enforcement cohorts, the more opportunities you allow your analysts or your crime analysis team, whatever the resource may be, inside the ropes of the activity that you're doing. If you're having a meeting with your investigators assigned to a case, bring the analyst in, let them listen. If you're doing a debrief on an event, let them listen. We have agencies now across the state. I won't mention any of them. I don't want to discuss from a program perspective, but there are agencies now that when they have not every homicide is a homicide, we have to bring a crime analyst to the scene, let them absorb what's going on, and to sit in the command post and be a resource and or to learn some of what's being moved in an investigation. But we have folks who are being deployed to a command post as a resource back to the center to support the investigation at the command post of a major crime incident, as well as for them to absorb information so that as they're assigned this work in the subsequent days, they have a really strong foundation. So the more that the agencies allow access in a controlled manner in the right spot, the ability for your civilian analyst to absorb information, the better. And there's really no hard step that when you're having a debrief on a homicide investigation is an update. Here's day 5 update in regards to what we're doing on a homicide investigation. To have that analyst sit in the background or analyst sit in the background just to absorb where you folks are moving, to have that understanding so that if you knock on their door next day because you want to work on a vehicle or a telephone number, they have a little bit more perspective on what you guys are looking for. It may reduce the amount of work that they have to do and speed up what they can get back to you.
Nice. All right. Well, let's finish up with personal interest then. And as I mentioned in your intro, you are freshly retired. And just in that, I think you mentioned yesterday in the prep call, you're still in that nice honeymoon stage of retirement. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about what your upcoming plans are and what you're going to get into.
So yeah, it's a great question. My wife and I both kind of stepped away from full-time work. It's relatively the same time. We're very blessed to be able to do so. So I've promised myself that I'm going to take 6 months and not even consider doing a next step, something on the professional level, if I do so or not. But just to really get an idea of how I really like being on the other side of full-time, I can tell you that I do wake up a lot more relaxed than I did, no matter what the assignment was or the work was before. So that's a great thing. I always carried my work with me. So that's great, right? So, but we have a couple of plans in place. We started a process a few years ago where we love to get in the Jeep and travel the country a little bit. We've done a couple of trips so far. We usually identify national parks and AAA baseball cities. And we do a little bit of that. We've done a couple of those now, and that kind of brings you into, it doesn't bring you into Chicago or New York or Atlanta, but it brings you into Des Moines and Oklahoma City and these other secondary communities that you otherwise wouldn't have a sight on. And we've really kind of enjoyed that. So we did a national park run a few years ago that included Yellowstone and a few others. Badlands, which was probably the most underrated. I had no expectation what the Badlands was, but I think it was probably my favorite part of the trip as much as Yellowstone. But anyways, we've done a few of those, and we're actually mapping out one that we're going to take off in the middle of next month, we hope. That will include a couple of stops at a national park. My wife has a affinity towards, is it the Gaines folk, Magnolia folks from the home channel down in Waco, Texas. They have a site down there. I think we're going to visit there for a day or two. And we have a son out in Michigan and a son down in Tampa. We're going to kind of make a round robin. And I think probably to elevate the Gulf Coast a little bit as we head over to Tampa. So we're mapping that out right now. It'll be an extended trip, and we'll probably do another one of those in the spring. But we'll see how it all goes. We're still taking it all in. I'm not really sure how I'll be in February when I'm sitting here in the Northeast in a 2 foot of snow. We'll figure out how that plays out when we get there.
I know. Well, I was just thinking that warm weather in the South might be a big tease this time of year.
Well, our oldest was congenial enough to move down there this week, so he's down in Tampa, and we're gonna. It couldn't have been any better timing for us as far as figuring out when we're needing to identify the spot we're gonna visit. So we got that covered now.
All right, very good, John. Well, our last segment to the show is Words to the World, and this is where you can promote any idea that you wish. John, what are your words to the world?
Yeah, I'll keep it within the crime analysis world. One of the things I often say about the work that crime analysis does for law enforcement, and it's obviously been elevated so much over the last 20 years. I've been involved in a lot of cases when I was back in the PD and investigations, and you think you have the right target and the right individuals involved in the process, and then you come to realize way later that may not be true. And I've had a couple of cases when that's been the case, significant ones as well. One of the things that I think we don't elevate enough in the crime analysis world is how often we as a profession help agencies to focus on who the true actor or actors may be in an investigation and stay away from those who may not. With the capabilities we now have with information technology, cameras and license plate readers and all those things, you may have an agency come to you with an investigation saying, hey, this individual or this vehicle is likely involved in our process. This is what we think we have. And you do a little homework and you realize, geez, that car was in New York City the night of the event, not anywhere in the region that we're at, because it was right on a camera, right on a license plate reader, whatever the case may be. A lot of what we don't elevate our work enough about is how much we help improve an agency to truly work on the potential solvability factors that are factual, rather than having to take 100 leads. They can focus on maybe what are 10 or 15. And to me, that's a great asset for crime analysis, and I think a characteristic that I think needs further elevation.
Nice. Very good. Well, I leave every guest with, you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later. But I do appreciate you being on the show, John. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
Hey, Jason, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Really appreciate the opportunity. Have a great day.
Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. You can show your support by sharing this and other episodes found on our website at www.leapodcasts.com. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or have a suggestion for our next guest, please send us an email at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Till next time, analysts, keep talking.